They say never get too comfortable at the top. I learned that the hard way. My name is Claire Danvers. I was the youngest female VP at Maven Tech, a mid-sized tech consulting firm in Chicago. After 18 years of grinding through brutal deadlines, all-nighters, and office politics, I'd finally earned the corner office. I was respected, well compensated, and dare I say it happy. But then came Elise. She was charming, bright, ambitious, a recent Harvard MBA grad who everyone called a rising star. She was assigned to shadow me during her onboarding. I didn't mind. I actually enjoyed mentoring younger women in the industry, and Elise seemed eager to learn. She laughed at my jokes, brought me coffee without asking, and constantly said how much she admired my leadership. I should have seen it. The signs were there from day one. The way she always asked about my projects, took extensive notes in every meeting, stayed late but never with me, always with someone more senior. She was observant, strategic, and underneath that sweet exterior was a predator in pastel blazers. It started small. A client proposal I'd worked on for weeks mysteriously got lost in the shuffle, and Elise submitted her version before I could present mine. It was almost identical except for a few flashy buzzwords and a different cover slide. Our boss, Dan, praised her initiative. I let it slide. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. Then a client I had managed for years requested a new point of contact. Elise. She told them I was transitioning out of the role due to personal issues. I confronted her, but she denied it with wide eyes and a perfect fake smile. Claire, I would never say that. Maybe the client misunderstood. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But then came the audit. Elise brought forward concerns about irregularities in some vendor payments I'd approved. She told HR I'd approved contractors without proper documentation. She hinted that I was struggling with burnout. She said she was just trying to help protect the company from liability. And just like that, everything I'd built began to unravel. I sat across from Dan, my boss of 12 years, in the glass-walled conference room. As he read the HR report, I could feel Elise's eyes on me from her desk outside. She was pretending to work, but I saw that smug little smirk she tried to hide whenever I glanced her way. Claire, Don said with a sigh. These vendor discrepancies, they don't look good. My stomach dropped. I'd approved those vendor payments personally because they were legitimate. The vendors were small contractors I'd brought on for a high-priority project. They didn't always have the fancy systems big firms use, but their work was solid. Elise had probably dug through the records, cherry-picking things to twist into red flags. Dan, I've done nothing wrong, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. These vendors were vetted. Elise is trying to be careful. Dan cut me off, raising his hand. She's brought evidence. Invoices, emails, it's all here. I glanced at the files and my jaw clenched. She'd even forwarded out-of-context emails to make it look like I'd skipped approvals. My trust in her was my downfall. I'd given her access to those emails when she was helping me organize project files. I left that meeting feeling like the walls of Maven Tech were closing in. HR launched a formal investigation. Suddenly, people I'd mentored for years avoided eye contact. Whispered conversations stopped when I walked by. Elise, meanwhile, was blossoming. She started dressing sharper, speaking louder in meetings, and casually mentioning how she'd stepped up while I was under review. But the final blow came 2 weeks later. I was called into another meeting, this time with HR Dan and the company's legal counsel. The verdict: I was being put on indefinite leave until the investigation concluded, which, in corporate terms, was the polite way of pushing someone out. I walked out of Maven Tech that day with my box of belonging, my heart heavy, and my mind racing with disbelief. Years of loyalty, late nights, and sacrifices on, just like that. I was disposable, but as I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching Elise through the glass doors as she slid into my office chair like she already owned it, something inside me hardened. No, this wasn't how my story ended. The first few weeks after my forced leave were brutal. I slept too much, or not at all. I ignored calls from friends, left unread the dozens of messages from old colleagues. I felt humiliated, betrayed, empty. But grief, as I'd learned years ago when my mother died, has stages, and eventually, I moved past despair and into something else. Rage. I couldn't stop thinking about Elise's smug smile, or the way Dan hadn't even tried to defend me. I'd built that department from scratch, landed multi-million-dollar contracts, trained 3 of the firm's current VPs, and now I was painted as some burned-out liability, all thanks to a conniving newcomer who'd manipulated the system. Started documenting everything. I pulled old emails from my personal backups. I made spreadsheets of project timelines, vendor approvals, and client communications, everything that could prove my decisions were sound. I even reached out to those same small vendors Elise had flagged, and they were furious when I told them what had happened. One of them, a retired Navy engineer named Call, told me bluntly, "You want me to testify? Say the word. That girl wouldn't last 5 minutes on a construction site, let alone call my work shady." But here's where it gets interesting. While digging through my documents, I remembered an old clause in Maventech's founding agreement. Back when the company was still small, I'd loaned them money. A lot of money. $250,000, to be exact. At the time, we were barely afloat. That investment saved the business, and in return, I'd been given 3% ownership through convertible notes. I'd never cashed them in. I'd forgotten about them, honestly. Life got busy, the company grew, and my stake had just sat there. Until now, I reached out to a lawyer I trusted, Marcy, a tough-as-nails corporate attorney, who didn't flinch even when facing down billion-dollar firms. "Claire," she said after reviewing the documents, "this is real. You still own 3% of Maven, and according to their bylaws, if the ownership structure hasn't changed substantially, you have voting rights, access rights, and get this," she flipped to a page, "if more than 20% of shareholders agree, the board can be forced into a special audit." My heart pounded. "What if I bought more shares?" I asked. Marcy smiled. "Now that would be interesting." I spent the next month quietly making moves. First, I liquidated a portion of my investment portfolio. It wasn't easy selling off some of the retirement cushion I'd built, but this wasn't just a financial decision. This was personal. I wasn't going to let Elise win. Not without a fight. Then, through a network of old industry contacts and a little luck, I learned something shocking. Maventech had been struggling financially, quietly, subtly, the kind of thing only insiders could spot. Turns out, losing 2 major government contracts and several seasoned project managers who'd left due to internal friction was starting to bite. But the company hadn't announced it. They were keeping the bleeding quiet. Even better, several minority shareholders, including some retired executives and early investors, were growing anxious. When I contacted them, most were eager to talk. And when I explained what had happened to me and how Elise had manipulated her way into power, they were more than willing to listen. One by one, they agreed to sell me their shares. I didn't buy them directly, of course. I set up a shell company, CD Equity Holdings, and used that to purchase the shares quietly, without alerting Maventech's board. By the end of 6 weeks, I controlled 22% of the company, enough to call a special audit. Marcy filed the paperwork on my behalf, and within 48 hours, the board had no choice but to schedule a shareholder review. That was when Don finally called me. "Claire," he said, his voice tight, "I just got word you've been buying up shares. What exactly are you trying to do?" "Oh, nothing drastic," I said coolly, "just protecting my investment. You know, making sure the company isn't being mismanaged by underqualified leadership." Silence. Then, "This is about Elise, isn't it?" "You mean the junior analyst who orchestrated a fake compliance scandal to steal my job?" "Yeah, Dan, it's a little bit about Elise. You're playing a dangerous game." "No, Don. I'm just finally playing by the rules you and Elise wrote, and I'm better at them than she is." He hung up. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. For the first time in weeks, the game had changed. The day of the shareholder meeting arrived on a rainy Thursday. I wore my sharpest gray suit, the one Harold had called my power armor back when we were still married. I walked into the Maventech boardroom not as a disgraced employee but as a major shareholder with legal representation and a strategy. Elise was already seated near the head of the table, tapping away on her tablet, all confident smirks and perfectly tailored clothes. She looked up, saw me, and froze for a second before regaining her composure. Don looked like he hadn't slept in days. The meeting began with the usual pleasantries, then moved into financials, revenue declines, missed projections, and ongoing optimization initiatives, their term for quiet layoffs. Then, it was my turn. As a shareholder with 22% stake, I began, my voice calm but deliberate. I am invoking my right to request an external audit into recent executive decisions, including project prioritization, vendor allocations, and most notably personnel changes made under questionable circumstances." Elise stiffened. Dawn shifted uncomfortably. A few board members raised eyebrows. Furthermore, I continued, "I'd like to introduce into the record documented communications indicating a pattern of unethical behavior by one Elise Harrington, including manipulation of HR procedures, false reporting, and leveraging internal relationships for personal advancement." I slid a binder across the table. Inside were emails, vendor testimonies, and time-stamped metadata from project files, showing how Elise had altered documents. Dan's face turned white. Elise opened her mouth, but no words came out. "I trusted this company with my career," I said. "I gave it 18 years. But I won't let it rot from the inside while someone plays CEO in training." One board member, a woman I'd met years ago at a retreat, spoke up. "This is serious. We need to review everything." The motion for an external audit passed unanimously. Elise's face collapsed like a crumbling dam. The room emptied quickly after that. Elise lingered behind, arms crossed. "You think this makes you a hero?" she hissed. "You're just bitter." "No," I replied softly. "I'm just done letting people like you rewrite the narrative. Enjoy the next few weeks, Elise. They'll be your last in that chair." I walked out of that boardroom into the rain, not caring one bit that it soaked through my hair. For the first time in months, I felt clean. The audit team moved fast. Within 2 weeks, they uncovered a nest of misconduct tied directly to Elise. She'd falsified expense reports, misrepresented client satisfaction data, and even siphoned project bonuses into side accounts under the guise of team performance incentives. When confronted, Elise blamed everything on me. "She taught me how things were done," she said in her official statement. "I was just following Claire's example." It was laughable and pathetic. The forensic team traced nearly all the fraudulent activity to the period after I had been placed on leave. Elise had gotten greedy, and that greed made her sloppy. She left digital fingerprints on everything. The board moved to suspend her immediately, pending final results. But that wasn't enough for me. I made a counteroffer through CD Equity Holdings. I proposed a buyout of Maventech's controlling stake. Several of the original shareholders were tired, ready to cash out before the ship sank any further. And with the audit revealing just how close Maventech was to imploding, they accepted quickly. By the time the audit was finalized, I owned 51% of the company, and that made me CEO. I returned to the office 2 months to the day after I'd been forced out. Same lobby, same elevators, same marble reception desk where I'd once stood, stunned and humiliated, with a cardboard box in my arms. This time, I walked in with a keycard and a team of legal advisors behind me. Elise was still technically an employee. When I entered the building, she was packing up her things when I stopped by her glass-walled office, my old one. The irony made me pause. She turned to face me. No makeup, hair unspoiled, no smile. "You won," she said flatly. "I suppose you're proud of yourself." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her. Really looked. This was the woman who'd tried to dismantle my life, who'd turned coworkers against me, painted me as unstable, incompetent, and now here she was, small, brittle, exposed. I finally spoke. "You could have built something here, Elise. I would have helped you, mentored you, but you didn't want growth. You wanted control." She scoffed. "Please, don't act like you're better than me." "No," I replied. "I'm just smarter, and far more patient." I handed her a final envelope, inside her termination papers, notarized with cause. "You're done here, and don't bother using me as a reference." She snatched the envelope and turned away. I walked out without another word, because when the war is over, the victor doesn't argue, they just take back what's theirs. The fallout from Elise's departure rippled through the company like a storm front. Some employees were shocked, others relieved. A few who had blindly followed her lead resigned quietly in the following weeks, but most stayed and started to look me in the eye again. I didn't walk in and play the tyrant. That's not who I am. But I made changes fast. I reinstated the team leads Elise had pushed out. I held department-wide meetings to address transparency and rebuild trust. I restructured vendor policies to protect both our integrity and our smaller partners, and most importantly, I implemented a new code of ethics, one that actually meant something. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding something stronger from the ashes of betrayal. Don resigned a month after I took over. He never formally apologized. Didn't have to. I saw it in his handshake the day he cleared out his office. The shame, the regret. He knew he'd backed the wrong horse. He'd let charm and youth blind him to experience and loyalty. "Claire," he said before walking out, "I misjudged you." I gave him a polite nod. "Yes, you did." I didn't need his apology. I just needed him gone. Maventech slowly found its footing again. The government contracts didn't come back right away, but new opportunities opened up. Word spread in the industry about the shakeup, the new leadership, the return of a woman who wouldn't be bullied out of her own company. And that's when something unexpected happened. I started getting emails from women in tech, from former colleagues, from young professionals who had seen Lisa's posts about me, smearing me as an example of a woman who couldn't adapt, and who now saw the truth. They thanked me for fighting back. They said it gave them hope. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Priya, a junior analyst at another firm. She wrote, "Thank you for standing up for yourself. I thought people like Elise always won, but your story changed that for me. Now, I know it's possible to fight back, win." I stared at that email for a long time, because it reminded me why I ever started mentoring young women in the first place. 6 months later, Maventech was thriving again. We weren't just recovering, we were reinventing. New leadership, new energy, and a culture rooted in collaboration rather than cutthroat games. I'd brought in younger voices, but this time, the kind that knew the value of listening before speaking. I didn't forget Elise, of course. She popped up now and then. I heard through the grapevine she tried to get a job at one of our competitors. She lasted less than 2 months before they let her go. Apparently, she tried the same power plays and they saw right through it. I never spoke her name again. In the office, she didn't deserve to live rent-free in my legacy. And this was my legacy now. Maventech reborn. Not in spite of what happened, but because of it. One crisp fall afternoon, I sat on the rooftop patio of our downtown headquarters addition I'd greenlit for Team Wellness. Tyson, my head of digital strategy, joined me with 2 coffees. He had been one of Elise's quiet supporters during her rise, but he'd owned his mistake and proven himself since. "You ever think about retiring?" he asked, handing me the mug. I smiled. "I thought about it once." He raised an eyebrow, and I realized I wasn't done yet. Too much still to build. We sipped in silence, watching the skyline. I thought back to the day Elise slipped into my office chair for the first time. Thought she'd won. Thought I was weak, past my prime. She had no idea who she was dealing with. And in the end, it wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't even about justice. It was about reclaiming my voice, reclaiming my name, and proving to them, to myself, that I was never the victim. I was always the storm. It's funny, isn't it? How sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened for you. Getting pushed out of Maventech broke me for a while. It shattered the image I had of who I was, how I was seen, what I thought I'd built. But it also forced me to remember something I'd lost. I wasn't just an employee. I was a leader. I wasn't just a mentor. I was a builder. And I wasn't just someone who had power. I was someone who had earned it, who knew how to use it wisely. Elise took a lot from me. Time, reputation, relationships. But what she gave me accidentally was something far greater. A reason to remember who the hell I was. Today, Maventech is on the verge of its most profitable year in a decade. We've launched 2 new divisions, and we've mentored more women into leadership roles in the last 12 months than the company had in the last 12 years. And as for me, I've stopped apologizing for being ambitious, for being direct, for being powerful. I've learned that sometimes being underestimated is your greatest weapon, because by the time they realize you're not the person they thought you were, you're already signing the papers that decide their future now. I'm curious about you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever been betrayed by someone who pretended to admire you? Tell me in the comments. I read every story. And before you go, I'm leaving on the screen 2 more stories. Know you'll love, one about revenge, and one about redemption. Thanks for staying with me until the end.